After the attack at Pearl Harbor by the Japanese, the goal of the United States military was to attack mainland Japan. This meant taking Pacific islands one at a time: Midway, Guadalcanal, Guam, Iwo Jima, and many other islands. This island-hopping strategy was very costly for the United States military. Almost 100,000 Americans were killed before the Battle of Okinawa, but even more costly for the Japanese, who had already lost over 1 million men. As the war raged in Europe and the Pacific, Americans continued to enlist or to be drafted for the military.
My name is Dick Whitaker. I was born in Saugerties, New York, which is 100 miles up the Hudson River from New York City. I went to school there for 12 years and was due to graduate in June of 1944. And I knew that I would be drafted. So I snuck away at Christmas vacation, went to Albany and offered my services to the Marine Corps, and they accepted. I passed the physical and then went home with papers to be signed by my parents. They rebelled and dug in their heels. They involved the minister and the superintendent of schools and the principal of the high school. I gave up my hopes of getting in the Marine Corps and stayed there, and sure enough, I was drafted about 2 weeks after I graduated, and about 2 weeks after that, went on a bus to Albany, New York, to be inducted into the Army, of course. And while I was going through the post office building, I had to pass the Marine Corps recruiting office. And lo and behold, the man who had interviewed me, the Marine who had interviewed me 5 months earlier, recognized me and yelled, "What happened to you?" And I said, "They wouldn't sign." And he said, "Do you still want the Corps?" I said, "Yes." And he said, "Come with me." And I kind of protested because I thought I was going to be going AWOL. And I expressed this, and he said, "Let me worry about that. Just come with me." So I went in his office, and there was another young man sitting there, and I learned later that he had the same set of circumstances that I had had. He had tried to enlist. His parents had balked. He was drafted. And again, that recruiting sergeant recognized him in line. So he said, "We're taking 2 Marines a day here. You're tomorrow's quota. Here's a chit for a room at the YMCA and a couple of chits for some food. Go down there and be back here at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning," which we did. And by 8:15, I was a Marine. I'd been sworn in, and by about 9 o'clock, I was on a train to Yamasee, South Carolina, home of Parris Island.
Graduated from high school in January of 43, and by April of 43, I was at Parris Island. I was part of the cleaning out of the high schools, as it's called. All of the high schools all over the United States were all put into Army, Navy, Marines, or whatever.
I joined the Marine Corps right after I got out of high school. Rather than face the draft, I just volunteered, and so they told me that if I volunteered, chances are I would get more of a chance of getting selected what I wanted to be in. And I wanted the Marine Corps because I had a brother that was in the Marine Corps in 1925, and so I kind of wanted to be in the Marine Corps.
I got out of high school at age 16 and had almost a year of college. I quit to join the Marine Corps in April of 44.
I had just gotten out of high school, so I really didn't have a job or anything like that. And then I joined the Corps in Chicago and went to Parris Island with the Marine Corps. I joined the Marine Corps because my brother joined the Marines. And so naturally I had to go where my brother was. But he went into the Marine Air Corps, and I was dumb enough to get in the Marine Corps Infantry.
Well, the last thing I thought of when I was a senior in high school And the last thing I ever thought of was the military. I didn't even want to be in the military. I didn't know anything about the military. Who did what and why. And then all at once the war came out of nowhere, you know. Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. And then I knew I was going to have to go. It was going to get me in one way or another when I graduated. So I began to think what I'd like the best. And I thought the Marines had such pretty freak uniforms on, I'd join the Marines. And I wore that, I had them dress blues on 3 days, I think it was.
By March of 1945, after the island of Iwo Jima was secured, Okinawa was the only island left before mainland Japan, which was just 350 miles away. Okinawa would provide the United States with air bases for bombers and a springboard to launch the attack on Japan. This would raise the stakes for the Japanese, who would now be defending home territory. The battle at Okinawa would prove to be the most costly battle of the Pacific War and helped President Truman make the decision to use the atomic bombs on Japan that would end the war. Preparation for the battle started in 1944 that would end up being one of the largest military forces ever assembled, an even larger Navy armada than the Normandy invasion. The 10th Army, which was made up of 400,000 Army, Navy, and Marine personnel, was commanded by Lieutenant General Simon Buckner, Jr. This included the 6th Marine Division that formed at Guadalcanal in September of 1944.
The 29th Marine Regiment, which was to be part of the 6th Marine Division, the 6th Marine Division was in the process of organizing itself on the island of Guadalcanal. And when we left the States, we knew that we were part of the 29th Marine Regiment. We were going to be part of the regiment. So we more or less knew where we were going. It took us about 30 days to get overseas from San Diego, and we spent about a month on the island of Bonica in the Russell Group, getting our land legs back. And then we went over to Guadalcanal and actually became members of the 6th Marine Division.
We got on the ship at San Diego, the USS Ernst, which had about 5,000 troops on it. And we went to an island in the Russell Group called Bonica, which was next to Pavuvu, where the 1st Marine Division was. We spent, 4 or 5 weeks there, and then went to Guadalcanal and joined the 6th Marine Division.
The 6th Marine Division was formed on Guadalcanal with they disbanded the Raiders and some of the other outfits, and they all got them all together with the 6th Marine Division. And 6th Marine Division was the only division that was formed overseas and disbanded overseas. 6th Marine Division never seen any stateside duty whatsoever.
We were on our way to Saipan, and several days before landing on Saipan, where our 1st Battalion, 29th Marines, was already there and in combat. The battle ended, and I think they got pretty smart and said, no sense putting these guys on that island. What are we going to do with them there? There's no facilities, there's nothing. And we made a right turn or something like that, and on the way we went to Guadalcanal. And there was no facilities there either. We landed in ducks. I'll never forget it. A duck is that army thing with it goes on land as wheels, and in the water, and the gun, you put your hand down 6 inches and you're underwater. I looked down, oh my God, get me out of here. But anyhow, we landed, and the next month or 2 or whatever, we made gravel roads. We put tents up. We did everything because there was no facilities.
We arrived in Guadalcanal shortly after Christmas, 1944. And we stayed there and didn't do much training, just some marching, keeping fit, so to speak.
While the Marines were training at Guadalcanal, the Battle of Iwo Jima started on February 19, 1945, and continued till March 26th, 6 days before the invasion of Okinawa. As the fighting went on at Iwo Jima, with nearly 7,000 Americans killed, the troops boarded ships not yet being told where they would fight the next battle.
Well, we were told to get all of our gear and equipment ready, that we were boarding ships and were on our way to some island someplace. Nobody knew where. Never heard the word Okinawa mentioned once. I guess maybe we're 2 weeks or so from the island, we finally heard the word Okinawa. And got on ship, and it took us maybe 20 days or so. Stopped at a place called Ulithi, a little small island called Mogmog. Go in there and they'd give us 2 cans of beer. And I remember that the couple Navy guys sold beer for 2 for $5. And some of the guys would buy the beer and they'd open it up and there was water in it. What the Navy guys have done, they would tip it over, drill a hole in it, drink the beer and put water in it and solder it up. We looked for them, never did find them, but they must have made a few bucks. The enterprising United States Navy. But in that anchorage that the Navy had made, there was enormous ships were all God out for the high horizon, all you could see. We did see one of the battleships come by us that was just hit terribly off Okinawa. It was a shambles of just like ironwork, all twisted and whatever. Anyhow, on the way to Okinawa, and then they announced we were going to land there. And they showed us maps, and they predicted we'd be, within 7 days, we'd be off the island because probably half of us would be gone. At least that's that. They thought it'd be another Iwo Jima, or worse.
March 13th, which happened to be my 19th birthday, we boarded ships, not knowing where we were going. But we knew we were going someplace, because we were well supplied, well armed.
We had no idea where we were going. When they give us shots and stuff like that on Guadalcanal, we got all our shots. But we didn't have any idea where we were going. And and we did. In fact, we didn't know where we were going when we got aboard ship. We just knew that we were going to go fight someplace. We didn't know, but what it might have been mainland Japan. We didn't have any idea.
And we went to the island of Mogmog, which was a staging area in the Ulithi Island group for this invasion. We went ashore there, had a few beers, and played some softball, got back on ship. Then we were told we were 5 days or so from hitting the island of Okinawa, which I'd never even heard of. So, and most of us never had heard of it either. But it was just another island. That's what the Pacific War was all about, taking islands.
We boarded the ship March 15th of 1945, and we got to Okinawa about March 31st. And we were anchored offshore about a mile from a battleship, and it was starting to bombard the shore where we'd land. And each of those 3 cannon shots would shake the ship we were on a mile away.
The invasion of Okinawa began on April 1st, 1945. The outlook for casualties was very high. This would be the first battle on Japanese soil, and the military planners thought they would fight a fierce battle at the beach. Nearly 1,400 ships lay in wait as troops boarded boats for the landing.
400,000 men called it Love Day. Elsewhere in the world, it was Easter Sunday, 1945. At 8:30 that morning, the Marines and the Army went in. "100,000 Yanks were rattling the lock on Japan's front door. They were plowing sacred soil with American boots, tractors, tanks. The first 7 days were battling, mysteriously quiet. Ashore, Army and Marines pushed steadily forward, looking for an enemy which had vanished.
We landed on April 1st, which happened to be Easter Sunday and also April Fool's Day. My unit was the third wave to go ashore. And because the first wave and the second wave was totally unopposed, we just followed them. I got out of the back of an Amtrak that had taken us ashore, and I never took my rifle off my shoulder. We just strolled on the beach, and we got ourselves organized, and we went inland about 2.5, 3 miles, and dug in on the Yontan airport, spent the night there, and came back to the beach and helped unload ships for 3 weeks.
But we laid there the first night on the beach and no fire at all. We had nothing, no opposition. We could not believe. It was like a training exercise. And we laid there all night and we got the tremendous fireworks up there from the anti-aircraft naval vessel weapons in the air.
The 29th Marines was in Corps Reserve, and the 4th and 22nd landed. There was no opposition, so we came ashore.
Nobody's shooting at them, anything like that. It was like they were going on a maneuver or something. And every day they thought maybe things would get a little bit more hairy, but they didn't. For 4 days, they just piddled around, and I think I wrote about them getting pigs and slaughtering them, and everybody was just having a good time. But then all of a sudden, they stumbled into the Japanese, and from then on, it was pretty hellish.
Yeah. Well, see, the Jap general fooled them. He made them think he was going to defend the northern end of the island. It was high and rocky and be hard to get into and up on, and it'd be murderous. They'd have the high ground. But he fooled them. He defended the southern end of the island, and the Army was hitting it.
I got in the little Higgins boats and stuff like that to go ashore, and there wasn't a lot of opposition, thank the Lord. And so our first objective was to get to an airfield. They wanted us to get there first.
The morning of Okinawa, when we were getting in there, was in a little bay. The troops are down in the hold, then you come upstairs and they're getting the Higgins boats alongside the boat ready to disembark. But while the others were getting down, I had just a moment to stand on that deck, and I was so proud of our country. I could have swelled up. There was battleships in there, big battleships, aircraft carriers, little boats of all kinds. The fighters was fighting overhead, and way up in the sky, as high as you could see, the Jap come out of the sky. I remember this one incident. And tracers from all those ships was going up there, from all them ships, and I know he hit some of our own planes, because this one Jap broke out of the sky way up high, and right on his ass was one of our planes. And he was trying to shoot that first plane, but it was, them bullets don't go where you want them to go. And I'm sure we hit some of our planes. But that was, to me, that picture ought to be on everybody's calendar. I've never seen a picture of it. What I seen that morning, it was so beautiful. I thought, boy, when America goes to war, they go to war.
After the landing on April 1st, the Army divisions went south, running into heavy resistance first. The 6th Marine Division moved north with only scattered fighting. During these first few weeks, American troops would hear the news of the death of President Franklin Roosevelt and war correspondent Ernie Pyle.
Then we were told after 5 days or 6 that turn left, the 6th Marine Division is now assigned to sweeping the northern part of Okinawa. Because when the Army and the Marines landed, the 1st Marine Division, they went across the island, across it, and faced south. In the meantime, we are now facing north. So we swept up the roads, very poor roads, Some tanks went through the concrete bridges.
We were supposed to go across the island and then take the northern 2/3 of it, which we did. And there weren't near as many Japs on the north. There was one battle on Mount Yataki on the Motabu Peninsula. The 4th Marines and the 29th Marines were involved in. The 22nd was much farther north, and we just secured the whole northern 2/3 of it.
By the time I got there, we were pretty much finished up north, and we all thought we were going to go home. So we were just delighted that, hey, this was a cakewalk for us. And then they told us, no, the Army has run into a lot of resistance on the southern tip. That's where all the fighting on Okinawa took place, on the southern tip of the island. The Japs gave the Marines practically 90% of the island with very little resistance, very little fighting.
The heart of the Army that was defending Okinawa had already gone south, and they had set up the Shuri Yanaburo line, and that's where they were going to take us on. And that general, the stories are that he studied the Pacific War and found that the Marines had never been stopped on the beach, so he tried to do it a different way. He let us come ashore, and he thought he was going to be so heavily positioned that he would take us on there and wipe us out. That's when things got tough. Around the 3rd of May, we arrived south, and we replaced an Army unit that had been there and taken heavy casualties. And we went in, took over their foxholes, and that's it. We were in it.
The casualties were monumental. The 6th was going up to the lines. We were going up in trucks, and there were trucks on the other side coming back. And there were Marines piled in those trucks like cordwood. You could always see the feet of the Marines. They'd put ponchos over them, but the feet would be hanging out. So you could see all these feet dangling out, and so it was like a conveyor belt. We were going up on this side, and they were coming back on that side. The only difference is that we were alive and they were dead.
As the 6th Marine Division moved south, they began to meet more enemy resistance. This included battles on many hills and ridges that included Half Moon Hill, Horseshoe Hill, and Sugarloaf Hill. That was one of the bloodiest battles not only in the Pacific War, but in all of World War II. After 10 days, Japanese forces had lost nearly 7 battalions of men. The 22nd and 29th Marine Regiments were almost destroyed taking Sugarloaf, with 1,600 Marines killed, 1,000 removed for battle exhaustion, and another 1,000 wounded.
And down we came and into this range of hills. The 1st Marine Division was on the left, and they had Shuri Castle was sort of to their left. And it wasn't in their area, but the 1st Marine Division ended making a sort of a sneaky left turn and took Shuri Castle, and the Army hated them for it because it was in the Army area. But the Marine generals had said, you got to take that Shuri Castle because that's where the artillery spotters are. That's the highest point in the southern end when they could see you, Sugarloaf. I went up there when I came back to Okinawa, and I stood on Shuri and looked down. Boy, you could see everything. You could see all the range of hills, so they could spot us, put artillery on us anywhere they wanted. And the Japs had more artillery on Okinawa than all the other islands put together. But in fact, it just was endless. And the reason being was when the Japanese ships were destined for the Philippine Islands, or wherever they were going to, from Formosa, they'd stop at Okinawa and they couldn't get off. Either they were sunk by our own subs, or they were destroyed, but they just couldn't get out of there. So they unloaded it. And by unloading on Okinawa, they had all the artillery, all the weapons, and all of the guns that they needed. So we suffered a lot from the artillery.
The 3 hills were from left to right, that is from east to west, were Half Moon, Sugarloaf, and Horseshoe. And my company was never on Sugarloaf. That's the one that has all the publicity. It was the big one in the middle. But you were on any of the hills and you'd get fire or directed fire like mortars and artillery from one or both of the other two. So we went up there after we'd been in the south on the front line for about a week, 6 days, something like that. We hit Half Moon, and my G company came off we went on there on the afternoon of the 15th and came off, actually the evening of the 15th, and came off on the afternoon of the 16th and formed on the hill we left the previous day, and there were 20 of us out of a company that had landed on April 1st with 255 Marines plus some corpsmen. So Half Moon was kind of a bad time.
You can't take Sugarloaf without taking the others. Half Moon Hill looked at Sugarloaf Hill. Crescent Hill was just on the left of it. Charlie Hill looked at it. If you could take Sugarloaf Hill, a lot of Marines were shot in the backs, because the other hills were just almost as important, but not as vicious. So the Marines took those hills prior, a lot of casualties, and then along came Sugarloaf, and that was just an attrition rate of every single day being whittled down. A platoon of 30 guys would end up with 6 or 7, or a company could go up there and they'd have 40 left, 20 left. It was bad.
My machine gun unit was attached to the 2nd Rifle Platoon. And everything we had done up until that point, we had that association. We were attached permanently to the 2nd Rifle Platoon. So on this day, the 17th, the lieutenant in charge of that unit said, "Let's go, follow me." And we tried to take Sugarloaf Hill. It was the 11th assault. And the Japs had a well-rehearsed defense. They had mortars zeroed in on us, artillery zeroed in. In fact, they actually let us get to the top when we were easier targets than we were on the move. But the mortar barrage was so intense we couldn't stay. We lost a lot of men. He got killed. He got the Navy Cross for his efforts. In any kind of a military operation, high ground is always desirable. I don't know why. You can see better up there, I guess. But they had, around the island, practiced their artillery being able to hit these high ground, and there wasn't that much high ground down south. So this hill was about 3 football fields long. You could run to the top in 20, 30 seconds. And the top was rather pointed. So once you got up there and stood up, you were silhouetted. You were right out in the open. And that's when they let loose. Mortars, rifle fire, machine gun fire, and even some artillery. And as I said before, the casualties were just awesome. And a sergeant named Ike Wanamaker said, "We got to get the hell out of here. We're all going to get killed." And so we picked up the wounded and dead and took off. And that hill was, as I said, had been assaulted 11 times. We were the 11th, and it was taken the next day. They finally got some tanks and enveloped it around both ends and went to work. And that did it. That part of the defense collapsed.
Sugarloaf was taken with a terrible cost to the 29th Marines. It was an atrocious cost. There was some 2,600 guys wounded and killed there. I can't tell you how many sick guys were lying on the side of the road. You'd see a heavyweight sergeant laying there on the side of the road, or in a fetal position, or sitting there with his helmet on his lap. The Marine would be crying and sweating streaks in black. You knew just he was battle fatigue had hit him terribly. And there was over 1,000 guys had battle fatigue. Today it's post-mortem stress or whatever they call it. I wonder how many of us came home with that after the war. We never knew it. But, it was bad. And then the sickness that hit between those people, the illnesses was in there: diarrhea, constipation, malaria, dengue fever was rampant in there.
Came down, picked up a man wounded, loaded him in an Amtrak, and we were badly scattered, which is scary and dangerous when there's no one around with you. I had one man with me, and we found a foxhole that somebody else had occupied, and proceeded to deepen it, make it more, give us more protection. And when I had finished, he laid down at the bottom of the hole and lit a cigarette, and I put my entrenching tool in the dirt on the edge of the hole, leaned back against it, took out a cigarette, and found that I had no matches, or my matches were wet. So I leaned forward to get a light from my friend, John. And as I leaned forward, I reached back and grasped the handle of my shovel for support, and a bullet hit the handle of the shovel. Right where my sternum had been a moment ago, I was now about 10 inches that way when this guy fired, and he hit me in the hand. He was obviously waiting for me to stop digging, so he wasn't going to take a moving target. He was going to take, and I sat down, that's when he decided to shoot. And the bullet actually hit the handle of the shovel before it got into my hand. But I had pieces of wood in my hand and fragments of that bullet. And my friend bandaged me up, and next morning, a corpsman came by and he looked at my hand. He said, "I can't help you, but you're going to go back." So I went back to a battalion aid station, and a doctor worked on my hand for half hour, picking pieces out. And it turned out it wasn't bad. It was bloody at first, but then that sort of stopped and bandaged me, and I spent 2 days there, slept on a cot 2 nights. That was the only time on Okinawa. I was on Okinawa a total of 101 days. 82 was in combat. And those 2 nights in the battalion aid station was the only time I didn't sleep in a hole that either I dug or found.
As the Marines went deeper south, they continued to fight Japanese troops, heavy spring rains, and sickness. By May 24th, a reconnaissance company of the 6th Marine Division crossed the Asato River into the capital city of Naha, patrolling the city. They dug in without packs or gear to hold the area until May 27th, when the 22nd Marines passed through the lines. The 6th Marine Division continued into the southern part of Okinawa with more heavy fighting and casualties. The 6th Marine Division also took part in an amphibious night assault behind enemy lines on Oroku Peninsula.
1st of June, we got word we were going to make a night landing behind the Japanese on Oroku Peninsula. So about, 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, we boarded these landing boats. We went out to sea maybe 4 miles out of sound so they couldn't hear us, and went up the coast, and then we turned left and came in again and made a night landing, unopposed. We were lucky. And that put us behind the Japs, and that really started the collapse, the total collapse of the Japanese defense.
Because this Shuri line was so difficult to break, and so the guys that do the big thinking that, well, the Japs are going to cave in if we land in back of them on this Oroku Peninsula. So they told my unit, okay, now the only landing craft we have are these Amtraks, and there was a seawall on Naha, and they brought these Amtraks alongside of the seawall. And they told us, okay, get in the Amtrak, and you're going to go across, and then as you have a straight line, one of the Amtraks in the front will fire a flare, and then you all turn and go toward shore, and you're landing in back of the lines. So that was exciting, because as we were going across there, the Nips were trying to put mortars into the Amtraks. You know, you see this big splash alongside of you, you know.
But the next day, we moved in on the Roku Peninsula, and we were lined up next to a big hill, and there was an open place, and there was another hill we were going to take across a valley, and there was a 47 millimeter dual-purpose Japanese cannon, something like 1,000, anywhere from 800 to 1,000 yards away. And they fired 3-round bursts. And the farthest burst was about 30 feet from me, and the closest was about 10 feet. I was kind of masked by a bush or a tree or something. The platoon leader went down, and the 3 men behind me went down. I got hit in the thumb, and just below the knee, in the hip, and the arm, and this fragment came out 5 years later. And I dropped my rifle, which is a crime in the Marine Corps, and I wrapped that thumb up in a rag, which used to be a handkerchief. And the platoon sergeant came up and said, "Let's go, Whitey." So I picked up my rifle, and he and I crossed this valley to a hill. I went to the right side of the hill. He went over the top of it. On the right side of the hill, there was a kind of a wooden house, about twice the size of an outhouse, and there was a Japanese machine gun in there. I couldn't see it, but I could hear the noise, and they had a very distinctive sound, a Nambu machine gun. So I fired a couple of clips, which I had a hard time loading my rifle with that thumb. I fired a couple of clips through the building, and the machine gun quit. And about that time, the rest of the platoon got over on the hill, and somebody said that this Sergeant Mitchell, good friend of mine, had been killed. He'd gone across the top of the hill, and a Japanese Lewis gun about 50 yards away with a Jap on it was what got him in the chest. And that was a big loss.
Down into Naha we went, the city of Naha. And it was a city of rubble. There are buildings standing, and there were 1 or 2 story buildings still up. The Tory entrance gate that you go in exists to this day. It never was knocked down. But the narrow gauge railroad ran from Naha in, and that was all destroyed. It was mostly house-to-house street fighting. Very, very little, what you say, organized 30 Japs fighting you. It'd be 2 Japs, 3 Japs in a building. If you fired on the building, they may run to the one in back of them. So it was on and on and on from one building to the next. It's like the expression goes, when we took one hill and we got on top and we looked ahead of us, guess what was there? Another hill. Well, it was the same at Naha. There was another piece of concrete. While we were there, the call came back for 237 millimeters to go with the recon company. We said, what the hell is this? I don't know, they want you to go up at night with the recon group. We said, yeah, okay. That crew and that crew. Guess who was picked? The same old 2 non-fitting bunch of guys. So anyhow, we wheeled the guns down. Truck took us somewhere, and we wheeled down. There was maybe 20 recon guys in a group. And they said, okay, form up in back of us and follow us. And we went single file through the rubble, down across Little Spring. It was very, very arduous type march to wherever they were going. It was winding, and lousy 37s bouncing around. We had the trick of letting the air out of the tires a little lot. If you let the air out of the tires, the 37 would bounce softly. But if the tires were very hard, and would go over a rock or whatever and bounce hard, so we kind of had to tie us down a little bit. But anyhow, we went up in that recon group. We got to the waterfront where there were sunken ships and a concrete causeway going over to an island. You could see it in the semi-darkness, whatever. And the lieutenant of the recon group stationed his recon men in this building. The building, it seemed to me to be full of some kind of a fiber or whatever, or wheat, because there was these large burlap bags in there full of this stuff. Made great sandbag type things. Some of the recon guys pushed them around. They were kind of behind us. The weapons company guys, we were assigned to a window over there, a few of us. Some of the recon men went on the roof of this building. 37 was put on the front entrance of the building, and one to the left, shooting across or guarding that causeway. And several recon men did swim over to that island, wrapped their 45s, that's all they went with, in vinyl or whatever. And over to the island, the end, they came back and reported that the place was loaded with them. There was a lot of Japs there. And the next day, while I was leaning against a concrete wall, building the window behind me, and just sitting there, and we were all gathering away, and somebody shouted, "The Japs are coming on the bridge." And somebody else, they got black satchels with them. They're gonna blow that thing up. Well, I had a BAR by then. I loved that thing. And the only problem was I had found a Colt mechanism for my hand, for the triggers, and I put that in the Colt and made the BAR jam. Every 6th or 7th round it would jam on me. And actually, that jam saved my life, because I was in that window and I was firing at that concrete bridge all over the place with the BAR. Next thing I know, it jammed. And I turned around and I put the butt on the floor, and you step on that bolt, and that way you get the jam out without using your hand. And I was all set to go back, and the next thing I know, I got hit with a baseball bat in the back of my head, right on the neck. And I felt a fierce burning, and I knew I was hit. I slumped down on the floor, and I put my hand there, and I pulled it away. It was covered with blood.
We broke the resistance there, and now we had to push ahead. So we're moving ahead, and now you don't know where the next resistance is going to be. You know, it could be 50 yards further. They could have built another, or it could be 100 yards further where they have another series of caves and so forth. You don't know. So you got to go out there and snoop and poop and try to find out, okay, where are we going to get our next resistance? So my platoon was given that job to find out, okay, where's the next resistance? And thank God I'm way in the back. So they went out single file, and I'd say, well, I know there were 25 of us. And I got the article here, I'll show you. It said of the 25, after the lieutenant who was leading threw a grenade in a cave, the whole side of the mountain, the whole side of the hill, went up, I mean, like 10 stories high. You know, it just buried everybody. And I was buried, my buddy was buried, and of the 25 of us, 23 were killed instantly.
But on the 9th of June, we took a hill, and we had our 7th platoon leader for the 3rd platoon. He was a gunnery sergeant named Quattrone, an old pre-war Marine, tough as a boot. And we got to this hill, and there were 3rd platoon was on this hill, and up forward there was a hill where the 1st and the 2nd platoons were. And evidently the gunny went up with the 1st and the 2nd platoons. So we had no platoon leader. So I was going to go to the first platoon and get some instructions what to do. So there was a hill that we were on, and we had a steep southern side with a gully alongside of it. So I went in this gully, and it was about 50 or 75 yards over to where the rest of the company was. And I did a gut check and stepped up out of the gully. And on this hill, a man named Warren Lowe got hit in the elbow and the gut, and he started screaming. And I stopped. Big mistake. I got hit in both legs by a single rifle bullet. And getting hit with a bullet feels like getting hit with a club or a baseball bat or something. But the bullet made a nice neat hole through my left leg below the knee, but in my right calf it tumbled, and I had a large size hole where it came out. And I swear I could feel that tumbling, but of course it happened in a fraction of a second. But bullets don't knock people; they make holes. So I was surprised, but I knew what had happened to me. So I was able to turn around and fall back in the gully. And this old boy shot twice more and sprayed me with dirt. But I crawled into the gully, and that was my third wound. That was the one that counted. There was a rule that if you had a wound that was serious enough that you had to spend one night in either an aid station or a hospital and get treated by a medical officer, that he'd write you up for a Purple Heart.
I was so afraid that back at Battalion Aid, they were going to send my mother this telegram, your son has been wounded in action. So I told him, well, I'm not wounded, don't send my mother any telegram, And I'm talking about sending my mother a telegram and asking them not to do that. And they're rolling their eyes, They don't know who's going to get a telegram and who isn't going to get a telegram. So I thought that I wouldn't get any Purple Heart or anything because I kept telling them I'm not wounded and I'm all right. And I'm going back to my outfit. So I was just away from my outfit for, a night. And but when I was in China, they said the following men are going to get Purple Hearts for wounds in China or in Okinawa, and I was one of them. I couldn't believe it. So I got the Purple Heart late. I got the Purple Heart when I was in China, but it was for Okinawa.
No.
And my mother never did get a telegram.
The final push into the southern tip of Okinawa was very costly for the Americans, the Japanese, and the Okinawan civilians. As the end of the war drew near, the Japanese continued to fight or commit suicide.
We had them kind of boxed in, and the island was getting smaller. And the island ended in a point, so everything was being crowded in together. The Marines were crowded in, the Japs were backing up, the Japs were taking civilians with them, which was a big problem. And, the end was near. They were running out of supplies, they were running out of men. There were many, many caves on Okinawa, especially on the southern end. And the Japs took refuge in those caves, took the civilians with them. And when we got there, getting them out of the caves became a real problem. We had dogs, but we lost some dogs. Dogs would go in and the Japs would kill them.
In there, we tried everything getting them out. We tried smoke. We tried, throwing grenades in. It was really a pain in the butt trying to get them out of the very end.
We found one way of doing it, which is terrible as far as the civilians are concerned. Most of those caves had vent holes up on the top of the hills, and like side entrances to them down by the water. And we would pour napalm which is the same thing they use in flamethrowers, in the vent hole, and then throw a white phosphorus grenade in it, which would set it off. And that turned the inside of the cave into an inferno. A lot of people were killed, Japs and women and children. And at the same time, there were boats going up and down the coast, broadcasting surrender instructions. We were dropping leaflets from airplanes during the daytime behind their lines. And simultaneously on these Navy ships, there were guys with M1s shooting people on the beaches. Could be women, children. I guess that they thought they were all Japanese, just shooting. Very sad. You know, the estimates vary about civilian casualties. Some say 100,000. I've heard as high as 250,000. We had a boy with us that I guess he was an orphan. I think his parents had been killed. His name was Taki. And we learned that Taki, he was traveling with us because we were taking care of him. We learned that Taki could tell a Jap from a Korean conscript or an Okinawan civilian. So whenever we caught a bunch up, we'd call out Taki and he would go down the line, Japanese. Then we'd separate them. Okinawan, Korean. He helped us a lot because the Japs, you didn't know what they were going to do. Somebody stands up in a cornfield and goes like this, it makes your heart stop because you don't know what's coming next. There may be a dozen people with him, all armed, waiting for us to come in and accept his surrender. So anything you did could get you killed, including absolutely nothing.
But we were moving through, you know, and they called up and told us to slow up and stop. We was moving too fast. So I went over to see how Maury was doing. He was right next to me. I went over there, he got wounded with a hand grenade. And there was 2 or 3 Japs laying on the ground. And I put him on a stretcher and helped him get him on a stretcher and got him out of there. And then I didn't know what to do with them guys they were laying on the ground with their face down. This is one thing I always will regret. And I didn't know what to do. I was by myself. My squad wasn't with me. I had there was about 3 of them laying flat on the ground, face down. I think they were trying to surrender, but I didn't know what to do. Turn my back on them or what, because they might have weapons, and they did do that once in a while. So I thought, well, the only thing I can do is shoot them and make sure they're dead. And I shot the first one, and he jumped. I'm pretty sure he was alive. And I just couldn't kill the others that way. And I left them. I walked away and left them. But I'll always regret that. If I'd have turned him over, I bet he wanted to surrender. And I'll wonder the rest of my life.
When you're fighting an enemy who has been told that he should either win the battle or die in the battle, or if neither one of those things happened, he should kill himself in disgrace. That makes for a very, very dangerous enemy. And we had many cases where men were killed needlessly just because they were trying actually to help someone surrender. And it turned out not to be the case. It was an effort to either penetrate the line, get behind us, hide themselves, but I guess, despite the instructions to kill yourself, there were still people that didn't think that was such a hot idea and just really wanted to surrender because they were in bad shape. They were running out of food, retreating. They would fight during the daytime, retreat at night. But suddenly we got word, it's over. The two generals committed ritual harikari, and that was it.
On June 22, 1945, the island of Okinawa was secured. Over 250,000 people lost their lives in the 82-day battle. Over 12,000 Americans died, including General Simon Buckner. 110,000 Japanese soldiers were killed, and an estimated 150,000 Okinawan civilians lost their lives.
These were men who died on the fringe of the atomic age. These were men who had fought the enemy from the beginning, in the jungle and on the atolls of the broad Pacific, and who had died fighting him on his own soil. These were men who never doubted and never knew the outcome.
The world will note that the first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, a military base. We won the race of discovery against the Germans. We have used it in order to shorten the agony of war, in order to save the lives of thousands and thousands of young Americans. We shall continue to use it until we completely destroy Japan's power to make war.
The invasion of Japan, we learned, was scheduled for November of 1945. And they dropped the bomb in August, I believe. And we got the news probably the next day. We didn't understand the news because they didn't give any details. But they said that the rumor was that these bombs were so big that they thought they would end the war. And within a few days later, we learned that Japan had actually surrendered. Japan, the military leaders were crazy. And they convinced the civilian population of a lot of things that weren't going to happen. But everybody had to stick with a point on it. The kids were armed, the women were armed, and they were convinced that they should die for the emperor in their defense of Japan mainland. And that's what was really going to happen if we had landed. They estimated our casualties, our side estimated our casualties to be over 1 million men. And I wouldn't be sitting in this chair today if it weren't for Harry Truman's decision to drop that big one and end the war. Because they were just crazy about their emperor. And I'm sure there were people in Japan who saw through it all. But the major chunk of the people were ready to go to the beaches and meet us there.
Intelligence on what the invasion conditions would have been were far too optimistic. In the first place, on the first invasion, which had been on the southern island, they would have been outnumbered. And on the second one, which would have been toward Tokyo, the Japanese had used a bunch of airplanes on their kamikaze attacks on the northern part of Okinawa, out offshore. And these have been their planes that might make it 900 miles, and that's it. But they're good airplanes, good fighters, good fighter bombers. They had a bunch of them, and they were fueled. And some of them were back in caves where they wouldn't even have to raise their landing gear before they could dive on the troop ship. So that would have been something to be down about 4 decks in a troop ship and drown before you even got ashore. Second thing was that the citizens had been trained They had spears made out of bamboo. They'd issue an old man a grenade, and he was instructed that when he saw a soldier, he would arm the grenade and go out and hug him and give up his own life, but he'd kill a soldier. But what would have been worse would have been to be killed by a 9-year-old boy with a sharp stick. A whole bunch of Japs would have died, many, many more than were killed by the atom bombs, as well as a whole bunch of us. And we were really happy that the bombs were dropped and that the Japs surrendered.
We were scheduled to be the first wave into Japan. The Marines were going to be the first wave into Japan. And we would have all been dead. So you say, how did you like living? Yeah, I think the atom bomb was a great idea, you know, because it saved my ass. It's that simple. And what am I going to tell you? Oh no, I would as sooner be in the first wave of hitting the beaches in Japan. No, I was a scared puppy.
I feel like it saved my life. I'm just almost sure it did. If I'd had to hit Japan, and I was going to have to, they was planning on it. They had plans made. And I know I wouldn't have survived that. It was a hard decision to make. A lot of guys wouldn't have made it. But Harry Truman did. But he saved a lot of lives when he did it, a lot of our lives.
Truman dropped the bomb, I think, as an American. It was the most sensible thing that we could have done. It ended the war, and they were barbaric people. It's a barbaric nation. They would not give up to the last thing. They wouldn't want to be taken prisoners. It would have been just absolute hell in that. And now you're really fighting for your homeland. The first place the Japanese fought that was a homeland was Okinawa, and we saw what a terrible thing that was. Iwo was not a homeland, it was an outer island, but Okinawa was only 300 miles from Japan. So it was considered a part of the mainland, but it would have been absolute hell if we'd have went in there.
Oh, I think the atomic bomb was what turned them to surrender. There's no doubt about that. It was such a massive blow, and it's a whole city, is just pulverized, and there's nothing quite like it ever happened before. And God knows, I hope it never happens again. But it was definitely the atomic bomb. There was a man named Corporal Melvin Grant. He wanted to talk about the atomic bomb and how important it was. And he says, we were thrilled, utterly thrilled, when we heard the news. Using the bomb was the thing to do, and we did it. And I had absolutely no regrets. We did it to save lives, not only American, but Japanese as well. My feeling was then, and still is now, that if there hadn't been a Pearl Harbor, there never would have been a Hiroshima or a Nagasaki.
After the Japanese had surrendered, troops started returning home from the Pacific. Some men went to Nagasaki and other Japanese occupation duties. Many men from the 6th Marine Division were assigned to serve in China until April 1st, 1946. Then they returned home to the United States without much fanfare.
Well, it was a little bit disappointing coming back. They put us on a troop ship as we had been on, We landed in Northern California, nobody around. They put us on a troop train for east, and they put it in every siding that freight trains wanted to go, So they put us in sidings time after time, and up around Chicago someplace they stuck us in a siding, and it was the day before Christmas, and I wanted to take off, but nobody would go with me. I was going to head for home.
When Junior Montgomery finally returned to the United States, he had spent 3 years fighting in the Pacific as a Marine raider and with the 6th Marine Division. In that time, his family had moved to another town in Indiana.
I didn't think about it till I walked off of that train that night, about midnight. And the train left town. All the employees left town. I was the only one in the depot. So I walked over to the window thinking, well, I don't know who to call. I'm hung up here. And I looked up the street, and then my dad come walking across the street. That was something.
Yeah, I came home and got on the train out in San Diego. And, when I got my discharge and got on the old train, and I don't know, it took about 3 or 4 days to get to Wichita. And when I got here, well, it was the middle of the night, so I stayed in a hotel. And then the next morning, well, then I got up and surprised my folks.
I took the bus back from San Diego to Omaha, where I had joined, and that's where my father was. And rode the bus back, and my brother was there, and my brother had joined the Marine Corps, and he went to San Diego for boot camp a week after I got back to Omaha. So I got to see him for a while anyway. So I got to Omaha about 6 in the morning at the bus station. So I went somewhere and had some pancakes, and then there was a place that was open where I could get my uniform pressed. I was wearing greens, and I called my father, and my father and brother came and picked me up. I was home.
Came back to San Diego, went cross country by train. On the way back, our train wrecked, went off the tracks in someplace in Pennsylvania. A couple of guys got killed. My parents knew I was coming home, and I debated, should I go and call now? And I never did. And when I got home, I found out they had learned about the train wreck and were worried sick. I'd been away 22 months in the Marine Corps, and to lose your son in a train wreck. Anyway, we went back to Bainbridge, Maryland, and went through the discharge process. I got on a bus or train to New York City and a bus to Saugerties. I got home 3 o'clock in the morning, walking up the street, and I saw a light on in my favorite saloon. And I looked in the window, and one of my good friends, Joe Rockline, was cleaning up. He was tending bar. So I went in there, had a beer, stayed about an hour, and then I went home, woke my parents, had breakfast, and then we went to the Memorial Day parade together. And it was a great day to get home from a war. You know, everybody's, hey, Dick, how are you? The war had been over 6 months, but it was a good day to get home.
The Battle of Okinawa was the last battle of World War II and is still one of the largest battles ever fought. The spirit, bravery, and love for their country has lived on with the men who fought there, and their sacrifices will never be forgotten.